Is the mic right?
I think the mic is right. It looks right. And welcome back to the pudding
The
episode.
pudding episode, yes.
Because we're eating instant pudding, which, to my disappointment, was not instant, but close. Close. We made it in the time that we decided.
What topics to have for this time?
Yeah, because we couldn't really think of anything. But anyway, we thought of something. And so, the first topic is logic is the best path to truth. We make heads for logic and
Tails against logic.
tails for some other mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll flip
Any other thing is potentially as good.
it. Yeah, and I'll flip it for you. So heads
Okay.
for, tails against. Heads, you're for logic. You want to start?
Okay. So I guess logic is very similar to maths, as in it doesn't seem to be human created. It seems to function as a part of the universe, right? So the logic I'm speaking of here is like more formal logic. Like you have statements, and these statements can lead to a conclusion and stuff, and you can even abstract it in the same way you can abstract math into algebra. And yeah, it just seems like an integral part of the universe. So it seems like a reliable way to arrive at truth. And things like math they are at the end based on logic. So
Sure.
it seems like the best way to me.
However, in science, saying it's the best way is not necessarily right, because in science we don't rely on the logic method as much as we rely on the empirical method. Repeating an experiment over and over and then getting observable results that we can trust. So it's not something that we can figure out, but something that we can do, test, and repeat and get the same results. And I would almost say that the observable is better than the theoretical in the terms of logic.
Yes, theoretical, but logic isn't necessarily against empirical. In fact, I would say for you to do something logically and to follow a proper logical method, you would have to take into account empirical evidence, right? If you're ignoring empirical evidence, you are not being logical. You are not making use of logic properly. And if your logical argument disagrees with the empirical evidence, then either you're misinterpreting the empirical evidence, or your logical argument is wrong and you need to reassess your logic. That doesn't mean that logic itself is flawed.
That was the other thing that I wanted to get at. Sure, logic itself might not be flawed, but when humans do it, you equated it with algebra. And the thing is, we don't necessarily always have all of the variables, and therefore we can come to vastly incorrect conclusions just because somewhere along the line we followed the perfect formal logic, but somewhere along the line we didn't have one of the key variables, and therefore our conclusion is hogwash.
Yes, but wouldn't I think that missing variables accounts for most things, most ways of gathering knowledge.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you do something like an empirical experiment, it's not your fault. You don't need to know that variable beforehand. You just measure what's observed. And so you don't need to include all of these, I keep using the word variables, but you don't need to include all of these variables beforehand as you would need to in a logical argument.
That is definitely true. But like I said, with logic, you take that into account. But there are also some things that we cannot get empirical evidence for. And then logic is better than most things at getting to those kinds of truth. And the things that we have empirical evidence for, we get the logic out of that. Even applying empirical evidence would be useless without logic, because getting statistics and matching that to a conclusion, you need logic for that. Empirical evidence doesn't work without logic.
I suppose, and that would be the case for some things that are set in stone. But I also, not necessarily the best way of describing it, but I also think there are some things that you can't necessarily reach that conclusion with logic. And that's more in a sense of something like emotional conclusions or learning how to interact with people, you can't necessarily use only logic to figure out how to make someone better, feel better.
Okay.
So feelings.
Can't you though? Like maybe with incomplete logic, like if you don't have all the variables, like you say, it might be difficult to get to that then. But I'm pretty sure things like, oh, I noticed that exercise makes me feel better, so I'm going to exercise more. Or I noticed that if I go to more social events, I'll improve my social skills and make more friends. Now, maybe in the moment you're not using logic, but you're still taking steps dictated by logic and then giving it over to more instinctual things. But that was kind of like part of your plan. And also, what truth are you arriving at? Remember, this is a theory about, this is a debate about arriving at truth. I guess like the truth of what actions to take to make you happier. But I think you can arrive at those logically.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah, I mean, in that case, personally, I can't really make any other argument than the empirical argument. So I think I'll concede with the logic. And do you want to try and make an argument against logic?
Yeah, I think I do.
Okay.
So I think the main thing here is the very first point I made was that logic does not seem man-made, right? But it kind of does if you go at it. Like, for instance, if you go to math, right, and you say like, what is math constructed around? Well, math is basically constructed around empirical evidence as well. One stone and another stone, and you put them together, now you have two stones. You observe that, so you know 1 + 1 is 2. But with logic, it almost seems like less so. Like, Socrates is mortal. Socrates, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Like, how do you know this for sure, right? There's something in us that we can draw this conclusion, and we know it makes logical sense. But where are we getting that information from? It just kind of, we know it works because we know it works. You can't really take it deeper than that. And you can say the same thing about something like faith, for instance, right? And it kind of boils down to similar things at the end. So you could then make the argument, and I am, that faith could potentially be as reliable a method of, or potentially also get at truth better in some situations than logic, because they both have the same flaw of we don't know where we're getting this from at the end.
Alright, so the first thing you said then is it's man-made, and yeah, I would agree that sure, the application of logic is man-made, but the logic within itself is almost, as you also said when you were on the other side, a thing, an entity within itself is that logic, if you apply it correctly, can't actually be flawed, because it's something that humans use, and so when there's a flaw, it's not in the logic itself, but in how we apply it.
I mean, okay, one of the most basic... Sorry for interrupting.
That's fine.
One of the most basic things in logic is, like, things that exclude each other. So, like, for instance, tables cannot be chairs. This is a table, therefore this is not a chair. That is, like, a pretty sound logical statement, assuming the first thing of... tables cannot be chairs is true.
Yeah.
But what about things like
the Raven paradox, where you say all ravens are black, and this thing is not black, therefore it's not a raven, or some...
No, well, yeah, that's an example of one, but that gets to man-made definitions more. I was more getting at, what about light? That is, something that is a wave cannot be a particle. I think that's a pretty sound logical statement, but wave is a particle and light is a wave and a particle at the same time. So that seems to defy logic. So that points to and like a very sound logical statement at that.
No, but that's a flaw in the man-made logic, because that, as you said, if you have the three statements, the third one can only be true if the first two was true, and in that case, the first two are not completely true, because in that case, a thing apparently can be a particle, or at least act as a particle and a wave simultaneously. So that's not a case of the logic being flawed. That's a case of the statements that the people made was where the flaw lied. And anyway, so you made a second point, which I can't now remember, and then you made the point of where we get the logic and the truth, and you also said something about how the stones together is the empirical, is basically empirical. But
I noticed the flaw in this argument while I was making it, but continue.
The nice thing about when you take empirical and logic is more often than not, they actually agree with each other. And so that's one key thing about logic, is that we can, with empirical testing, we can actually prove the logic as well. And therefore, in a way, logic has proven itself to actually work, whereas something like the case of faith has not proven itself to work, because sure, we still maybe not know where the information comes from, but we do know that the conclusions, in the case of logic, are usually, if the logic was done right, are usually correct, whereas in the conclusions of something like your example, faith, not
a lot of times,
not
empirically proven to be incorrect in a lot of cases. I think I'm going to concede.
Sure. This pudding is really sweet.
Really, I devoured mine. It's already done.
I'm eating it slowly.
It's like the perfect sweetness for me.
All right, so I think we've.
That's why you take the small spoon, you fool.
You fool. But I think we agree that logic is good.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, I forgot to make the argument when I was arguing for logic that we are debating with logic right now. So if logic wasn't reliable, then we wouldn't be able to get to that conclusion, even because we wouldn't be reliable. I can't believe I forgot to make that point.
Yeah. Also, it was funny when I made the raven paradox. As I said it, I was like, "Wait, how does it go again?" And I was just like, something about a bird,
white raven
being black, geese. No, wait, that can't be a raven.
Okay,
anyways.
Well, I think conclusion logic
is probably the best
more
part
reliable than other methods.
Yeah, maybe.
Especially if you like we said, as long as you assume that logic and the empirical methods support each other and aren't against each other, because if they're against each other, you're doing one of them wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, so the second topic, what was the second? I don't know.
Didn't you write this down?
I did just now. The should we create virtual life?
Okay, so I think we just need to clarify a few things for the audience here that we clarified for ourselves. Virtual life, in this case, would be conscious. So we're assuming we have the technological capability to create virtual life, say by cloning a human brain into a computer, and that thing can experience things and is conscious.
Yeah.
Should we then do it? And I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, these consciousnesses are human level. We're not super AI or anything, because that just turns into a different argument, and not cow, because that also turns into a different argument.
Right. So, heads, where's my coin? Heads, you're for we should create virtual life. Tails,
I'm against it.
You're against it, obviously. Tails, you are against for we should create virtual life.
You want to start? I started last time.
Sure. So, all right, I'm for. I almost made an argument for against them. Well, yes, we should probably create. If we can, I would say yes, because it would be helpful to have. How can I put it? Increasing the brain capacity of the planet can only be a good. Well, not only be, but will probably be a good thing, in terms of, finding solutions to things. So I think, and if we don't have to necessarily increase the birth rate or increase the actual number of people who need resources and all those interesting things, but still have the increased brain capacity of a population, surely that must be a good thing, something that's worth doing, in terms of colonization, in terms of just general
production, science, or things like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so firstly I want to point out that while they would almost certainly use less resources, they also definitely wouldn't use no resources. Brains take a lot of energy, like even
Sure,
in
but
the human body, and I think
less than man.
yes,
Man.
I think it would definitely take less energy. Okay, so I think the problem here is the possibility for abuse, right?
Do you want my pudding?
Yes, I do want your
There you
pudding.
go.
Take my small spoon so it isn't too sweet. Why is there water around your pudding? There was no water around my pudding. This episode is really living up to its name.
Yeah, this is the pudding episode.
It's
the previous time I actually wrote down the topics, sort of, and this time I'm just going to call it the pudding episode. Anyway, you were making the argument against.
Yes, okay. So the problem is the potential for abuse, see? And this goes in two directions. Is there is a power imbalance between these two. Say you create, you're like a government and you really need research done on some like real sciencey shit or like warfare shit. It would be then advantageous for you to create like millions of mines without the rest of the world knowing, and it would be pretty easy for you to do compared to like getting actual scientists. Create millions of mines and like just abuse the shit out of them to get work out of them as soon as possible, and then you would probably be incentivized to destroy it afterwards, because I mean that's a violation of human rights if they're conscious. So you just created a lot of lives, make them live lives of suffering and just like pure work, and then eliminated them. And the scale of atrocities possible when you can create life so cheaply is just so unimaginably larger than when you need like actual physical resources to do it.
I mean,
that's like, not to mention, what if this technology gets cheaper and people can do it on home computers? You're gonna get some fucked up sadists doing shit.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but even though it will be more difficult to manage, I think there will still be rules in place, especially in the case where they say on the consciousness level of humans that they will have rights, and they will, but that's a different argument, but there will be rules in place for how to use or not use but interact with these virtual minds.
Yeah, there will be rules.
And sure, government might be able to exploit it, and it might be easier than they can do it currently, but I mean currently the government can also exploit and just have a bunch of slaves or something like that. And sure, it might be a bit easier, but that, yeah, I don't necessarily think they would do it just because it's easier.
I think if you look at like places through history, if they had access to things like large cheap labor forces, right, and slave labor and stuff, which I think you would be able to do with this, basically. They would have rights, almost definitely. But with how easy it would be to hide, I can imagine at least one country doing this, like at some point. Because it's, as long as they hide it, it's like free labor. And immense amounts of it. It's so advantageous. So I do think people would do it. And you just need one country once to do this for like a month, and it could create human suffering on the scale of nothing we've seen before, right? So just like even if you need government-sized computers to do this, and even if the chances are fairly small, I think the risk is just too great to take, and the incentives are all there to work these consciousnesses near to death.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. In the case that it will be easier, and it will, looking at history, they probably will do that. But isn't it a case of the pros outweigh the cons in terms of what we can gain versus the sacrifices that we must make? That sure, there might be potential slavery, essentially, in the case, seeing as they're sentient, but the development, the growth of humankind, or actually all life on this planet, would be so rapidly accelerated that wouldn't that be a sacrifice Stalin is willing to make.
Well, I think like that comes with its own risks as well, because yes, that would be rapidly like developed compared to what we have now. Because even if they're on the level of human intelligence, just so many of them, and more essentially, I think the speed at which they could communicate directly with each other, right, would enable for collaboration on like with science and stuff that we've never seen before. And I think this actually poses a similar threat to
AI.
super intelligent AI, because as individuals they might not be super intelligent, but they almost certainly will be as a group. And then you get the opposite problem where they could potentially start seeing current human lives as like, I can imagine they could see us as a lower form of life, maybe, because they would be so disconnected from us. Not to mention, if they really do run on computers, and I've kind of been assuming this isn't the case up till now, but there's quite a possibility that their brains are sped up, right? Because brains do not work at the speed of electricity, like signals and stuff. So if you upgraded just like the speed to work with electricity, they would experience time subjectively a lot slower than we do. And it would create like such a rift between them and us and make them seem more intelligent.
Technically, your brain does work on electricity. It's a whole
but like the
sodium potassium pump and action potentials and that propagates.
But that's the thing. It pumps actual ions, right? And like the time.
Sure. But
it takes to fire synapses and stuff is a lot slower, I think, than just having it replaced with wires and transistors if you have it in the same size.
Sure. But that's a completely different argument. But you're essentially making the argument that there's the threat of a hive mind or an AI to human life.
A similar threat, not quite the same. Like they would still probably be individuals, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, but I do think that they would be limited by us and the technology. I don't think they'd evolve so rapidly that they completely.
It's not like an AI that can create a better version of
itself. And even if that was possible, I still think the incentive for them to do that would be unlikely. And also remember that these virtual lives are based on us, so they'd have the same intelligence as humans, and even I mean, sure, we'd have the possibility of a hive mind, but even so, I don't think they'd essentially just be a very big population of people without bodies.
I think you have like the point I made there wasn't all that a good a point. I think I agree with you there, but I still don't know if the pros outweigh the cons of potential suffering.
See, I think it does. It might, but I don't think we can really
argue with that. Are we going to have our first agree to disagree?
Yeah, sort of, I guess, but yeah, sort of.
No, what do you mean sort of? This is the exciting moment for the show.
Woohoo, let's celebrate.
So far we've agreed on everything except those stupid questions that Marcel gave us.
Anyway, so do we both concede now, or?
I think we agreed to disagree. We reached the conclusion that we don't agree on this topic because we put value on different things, I guess.
That's true. But let's switch anyway.
Well, we'll see then if we switch. Like if one of us changes our minds, then
that could be
quite possible.
Yeah. So anyway, so now you are for should we create virtual life, and I am now completely against this abomination of yada yada yada. So,
can I start?
If you want to, you may.
So I'm going to make the exact opposite of the point that I relied on earlier. It gives the potential of paradise to billions, trillions of human, quote-unquote, souls, of human consciousnesses. You can basically create heaven and create, like, let's say 2/3 of all humans that exist or now live in computers. You can basically have 2/3 of all human in heaven. They further the resources also as well so much that at least like 3/4 of the other third will have like their lives improved a lot as well. So
Sure.
yeah,
The thing you made a similar point with me. Because you said the potential suffering if they were enslaved. I think potentially if you create this virtual life, I think they might come to a very nihilistic conclusion themselves and not find any meaning in their own life. I think they might come to a conclusion of suffering all on their own. I don't think we need a government to sort of instigate that, because I think that first of all, you can't really have any of the pleasures or sufferings of normal life. You are just a ghost in a machine, a copy of some other carbon-based life. And so I think they'll have a true struggle with finding meaning in why should they, first of all, meaning and motivation. First of all, why should they help further humanity? And even if they do, what benefit does it hold for them? What do they gain out of it? Because most of developing humanity would say, if you take simple examples, would be something like improving agriculture or colonizing or all of those, but none of those examples would help them. So why if they have no motivation, why would they do that?
I think this is actually pretty easy to counter. As I can see, you said firstly they can't experience any of the pleasures or pains of normal humans. I disagree. You can probably have them set up in a virtual world. I can hardly see us doing this without setting up a proper virtual world for that. Even specifically with human brains, because that's like what human brains are built around, is functioning in the world, right? I think it would just be better for them to be in a virtual world, and they still have all of the inputs in their brain for pleasure and suffering and all that. So I think that's fine. As for they would make nihilistic conclusions, I don't see how they are in much of a different situation than us in that regard, right?
Exactly what I'm saying is life is
we should all just fucking kill ourselves. Good point. No, but I think like for the same reasons that the vast majority of people here don't kill themselves and decide to continue living, they would too. It's because
despite our best efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I just said our message there to the people, but yeah. I think they would still just find enjoyment in their lives. And as for what would motivate them to work is, what else are they going to do? Most people would work on things. If they were truly in paradise, most people would probably have a hobby project, and there would be so many hobby projects that would still benefit humanity. Otherwise, I can totally see an economy forming around something along the lines of cryptocurrency or some kind of other digital currency, that if they live in a virtual world, they can get things in that virtual world. And the other reason is, once again, if they live in paradise and all their needs are taken care of, well, just human empathy. I could see kind of like a work economy being built up around human empathy for the other people.
Okay, sure, human empathy. I can hear you there. The other thing I thought about is, well, the reason we probably shouldn't or wouldn't create virtual life is the same reason we don't don't often create synthetic or biological life. It's the same ethical concerns, whether it's on a cellular level or on, in this case, a sentient level. There are just some ethical concerns that are too complex for us to fully comprehend, and that's why we don't do it, and why we probably shouldn't do it either.
What ethical concerns? I think just saying, it's too complex for us to comprehend, is kind of like a hand-wavy answer.
You wouldn't understand.
If you can't explain it, then I don't take it as a point. I need like an example here.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do know that that ethics concerning creating life, that it's a no-go. It's a no.
How's
no
it different from birth, though?
That's a good. I never thought of that.
That's why I always think the ethics of creating life was always a bit weird. But I think it was the ethics of creating life is weird because of the enslavement possibility. But like,
Yeah, but most of the time when they talk about the
Yeah, but
ethics of
that's
life,
just-
they talk about it on a cellular level.
yeah, and that's dumb.
I'm not gonna enslave my amoeba.
Like, if you have issues of enslavement of any kind of life and not just like human level intelligence life, then before, saying, oh guys, maybe we shouldn't clone this amoeba, you should say, maybe guys, we should stop factory farming chickens, That seems like a more effective angle. So I can't really see any objection
Yeah.
to just creating life. I know people are concerned with it, but I've never understood the points that they've made.
Also, making that argument from my side would be really stupid
Because that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Or what you're going to be doing at some point. Yeah, so I know you don't believe in that argument.
So I think we've reached the point where, yes, I have changed my mind on this side, and I think we should create virtual life. And when we were switched around, obviously, then I was arguing for it. So then
I think I've also concluded that we should create virtual life. I am now very conflicted of what I actually think about this. This is like really muddied the water for me. Before we had this debate, I was almost certain that creating virtual life would be a good thing. Like I said, before we started recording, and what you mentioned it briefly is like colonizing the solar system. It just seems like a big step for furthering humanity. But like, I kind of convinced myself of the suffering thing as well. I really don't know right now what I think about this.
Yeah. I don't know either. So
Damn. So we had our first agree to disagree, and in the same argument we had our first proper
yeah, and a nihilistic conclusion that everyone should just go kill themselves.
No, come on, we've been selling that point forever now.
Yeah.
That I think that's like the branding of our channel,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's fine. No one watches this shit. But the
Once again, I'm pretty sure Marcel watched 5 minutes of one episode.
we have the previous video had 7 views. I'm like, who are these people? That because I think YouTube works on the algorithm, not algorithm. The YouTube works that you have to finish the video before it counts as a view.
No.
Is that face?
Yeah, you need to get like a certain way in, but you don't need to finish it.
So I was looking at them like, who watches this shit?
Because I think I watched it and I listened to it in 3 sittings, so that's 3 of them potentially.
Yeah, like accidentally press the repeat button or something. Anyway, let's
move on to the next one.
Yeah, so I like this one. It's the right thing to do versus the smart thing to do. Okay. I don't think we need to clarify. I think we can leave it sort of open for interpretation.
Can we though? Can we debate around something with vague premises?
No, we can't.
No, we can't. Okay, clarified. Go for it.
Right. So I think this. First of all, when I say the right thing, this isn't a moral argument. So it's the sort of government, not governmental, the sort of societal accepted right thing to do. So it's not a morality argument, and it's in terms of,
I think, following the cultural and societal norm and law.
yes, that's what I mean. And in terms of the right thing to do versus the smart thing to do, probably best explained with an example. For instance, in the case of a test, something like that, and now with the whole COVID situation, all the students are writing online. So maybe the smart thing to do would be to not cheat, but maybe have cheat on the test versus doing the right thing to do, and that's follow the rules, which would cause you to do worse in the test than if you had cheated, which would have been the smart thing to do. So an example like that, or a different example I can think of, if something like in a work setting when you've been offered a promotion, the smart thing to do might be to take it, whereas the right thing to do might be saying, sir, Steve's been working much harder than I have. He deserves the promotion. Examples like that. So that's
when we're saying smart, I think we're also mainly talking about smart for you personally. We're not talking about like what is the best for humanity as a whole.
Yeah. Well, it can also be, for instance, in the trolley problem.
The smart thing to do would
so that wouldn't be you, But obviously the trolley problem, I think we actually mentioned it before, but one person on one track, 3 person on the other track, train is heading for the 3 people, you can switch the lever, making it kill only one person. Yeah, okay, so so that would probably be the smart thing to do, because you lose 1 life instead of 3 lives.
But it would... I don't think that has a right thing to do in the eyes of society, though. I think that's kind of like the point of it.
Yeah, but
that would be the smart thing to do still.
Sure. Yeah.
So logically driven.
Logic driven. Yeah. Anyway, so why do I keep losing my point?
Cool. Yeah, this is a very important thing. It's almost as important to the pudding as the pudding to this episode.
Right. So heads is going to be for the right thing to do. Tails is for the smart thing to do. Tails, you're for the smart thing to do. I'm for the right thing to do.
Okay, cool. So, I guess I'll open. It's like societal norms and laws and stuff, right? They are far from perfect. Like, we know this. Even if you think that today's laws and norms are completely 100% perfect, right? You can look back historically and like objectively say that's not true, because they used to be different from now. So, that would mean they were wrong at a certain point. So there's no evidence that they are perfect today. So the smart thing to do, if you drive your life morally, right, then following the laws and societal norms isn't the right way to go about that. And then you might just as well pick the smart option, which might be more moral. Yes. It might not, but it'll be better because it's driven by logic, which, as we established, is a good thing.
It's a good thing, sure. But the problem with that very selfish look on things is, sure, you as an individual might be better off, but imagine a society where every single one argued like that, and everyone was only in it for themselves. How could a society function if you never think about what's the smart thing, or what's the best for others, but rather what's the smart thing to do for yourself? And that's where the thing of the right thing comes in. It's the right thing is sort of a guide to what to follow. Because I don't think that everyone is not necessarily as smart or smart enough to always make a smart choice that's really the smart choice, and therefore the right thing to do acts as a sort of a guide, not only for those that can't make the better choice, but also for society to function as a whole.
What about when the right thing to do according to society, because we have made it very clear that's what this is based on, was just like super objectively wrong, like apartheid era South Africa, where the right thing to do was, the cultural norm was to treat black people like lesser people, they didn't have voting rights, and the right thing to do would be to not attend rallies and stuff, to protest, to support change and stuff like that. So that shows that it isn't even a good guideline. And you're going further back, things like slavery, a bunch of different things. So it's a very flawed
that
guideline.
Example I don't agree with necessarily, because even in that time, people were well aware that it's not the right thing to do. Even the government knew it's not the right thing to do. They laid emphasis on it that maybe it's the important thing to do. And but the rest of the world, and even many of the people in South Africa knew that, okay, obviously this is not the right thing to do. Same thing with slavery. And also, I can't...
What? I don't think the same thing... I can take your argument there, but I do not think the same thing applied to slavery. I think most people, when slavery was at it like a big thing, it was like people were seen as subhuman. How even Plato thought that slaves were essential for a society to function.
Yeah, sure. No, but I don't have the facts for this, but I'm pretty sure that people still knew that that's probably not the right thing to do. I don't think people were so completely brainwashed or convinced that slaves are not people. I don't think.
What about like Nazi Germany?
Same thing. I don't think
that era where Japan just went and mutilated people.
Same thing. I don't think that people thought that was the right thing to do necessarily. I thought people maybe even thought that that was the smart thing to do because they can gain land or gain things. So actually, I think that would be a counter argument in saying that. I think from their perspective, that was the smart thing to do for society to function. In the case of, did you say Plato or Socrates?
Both of them, I think. I think like Plato said it, but maybe Socrates thought of it. I don't know.
Anyway, so I think, especially those examples, I think they might have thought that was the smart thing, but not necessarily the right thing. And also, what I wanted to say is, I can make an argument for what society sees as the right thing now. But as you said, sure, the right thing changes, but it doesn't necessarily change for the worse. It often changes for the better.
It does often change for the better, but my point with that wasn't against that. It was more the fact that to show that what we think of as the right thing today is probably imperfect. Also, I'm going to still like very strongly disagree with you on we don't have the time to fact check now.
Like a slave.
Yeah, we don't have the time to fact check, but I am pretty sure there were a lot of historical situations where people thought it was the right thing to do to subjugate these subhumans or like teach them the word of some god or another, and if they don't listen you kill them because you're ridding the earth of this blight or something like that. I mean, the Crusades, they definitely thought that was the right thing to do.
But they also thought that was the smart thing.
Yes, like maybe. I think it would depend on the person, right? But my point is that societal right thing does not mean the right thing, does not mean the morally right thing. Whereas your point earlier was that if everyone in society thought that selfishly, it wouldn't work out well, right? Well, 2 points against that. One is you could think smartly about like, oh crap, that's kind of how society would break down. That could be like a smart thing to think as well. But also, I think society would then just adjust the incentives, which has been kind of like a more modern trend, to make the smart thing to do the right thing to do. That's kind of been like, you know, adding a fine to drinking drunk. So now people...
to drinking drunk.
Yes, drinking drunk. Driving drunk. So now people... The smart thing to do now aligns with the right thing to do. And a society could probably do that pretty well to make it not fall apart. And I think they have done that for quite a while. I don't think society would fall apart if everyone thought selfishly.
What you say? We're not working on honor? Alright, I can't. I agree with that.
Okay.
So I concede with this side. Anyway, so I'll switch to the smart thing to, unless you have another point.
No, please start. I need to think of something.
Alright, so I'll switch to the smart thing to do, and I'll start off by agreeing with you that, yeah, first of all, the right thing to do is so subjective, whereas the smart thing to do is can be subjective, and it can be personal for yourself, but in most cases it does have an objective basis. And earlier I said I don't think people necessarily clever enough. That's a lie. I think people should be clever enough.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to refute that. I also think that's wrong.
I think people would definitely be clever enough to realize what the smart thing to do is. Also, with the thing of personal gain, sure, I think some people with that incentive for personal gain will do the smart thing to do in order to gain personally. But I also think people will still be able to do things that are not necessarily good for themselves, but good for others, or for at least for the most others, in terms of what the smart thing to do is, and not in terms of what the government's saying the right thing to do. And
also, if you look at stuff like, I know I'm making a point against myself here, but if you look like something like capitalism, that is an example of a system that is built upon the presumption that everyone is acting selfishly and making the most intelligent decisions. And capitalism isn't perfect, but it seems to be doing okay.
Yeah. The system we work on currently is like a mixture of socialism and capitalism. Anyway,
well, South Africa anyway.
Different topic, but
yeah.
So that's on a larger macro scale, and on a personal scale, I personally would probably always choose the smart thing to do, rather than the right thing to do, because I don't, first of all, agree with other people on. Everyone seems to have a different idea of what the right thing to do is, and oftentimes the smart thing to do includes the right thing to do to some extent. For instance, in the cheating thing, it's actually in the cheating in a test thing, it's actually the smartest thing to do would actually still be to not cheat, because in the long run it's more beneficial for yourself. And so,
damn it, I also want. Why do I keep forgetting the points I want to make? I wanted to make that.
yeah, right. So that's another example of something that would be the smartest thing to do, and in the short term, not necessarily the right. But in the short term, also the right thing to do. Yeah. Wait. No, in the short. Yeah.
Okay.
Should I keep rambling until you think?
No, wait, hold on. I got this. I don't got this. Think for yourself, people. Traditions is just peer pressure from dead people. Like, obviously you should think for yourself and work things out for yourself and not rely on a right that is given to you. Like, you can make your own right by logically thinking about it. I can't even put up any arguments against this.
Yeah.
I'm really trying, but you already made basically all of the points that I would have made here, and it's either been refuted by you just now or refuted by me earlier. I very strongly think that you should follow the smart thing to do instead of the right thing to do, right as seen by law and society. It makes so much more sense. Law is an approximation of what is right. It isn't, and not always a very good one.
Yeah.
I think I concede.
I gathered that, yeah.
What? No, that was my argument.
Well, okay, cool. We can
conclude the pudding episode.
So, just to run back through it, so we think logic is probably the best path to truth. That was the first thing. The second thing is
we have no clue if we should make intelligence in computers.
We don't know if we should create virtual life, although I think seeing as both of us agreed on the side that we should, but we were uncertain when we were on the side whether we shouldn't. Well, it wasn't a full agreement, but it was a.
Yeah.
So I think we don't know, but we're leaning more to we probably should create virtual life, although we don't know how the suffering thing is going to play into that.
Yeah, the suffering thing. I think if you just get a good way to avoid the absolute atrocities.
So I think we can conclude there that we should, but there are some kinks that we need to
like
sort
a
out.
big asterisk next to it.
Yeah. And then lastly, the right thing to do versus the smart thing to do, and the smart thing to do is the right thing to do.
Exactly. Once again, logic is good. Use it. Don't use societal values and law as a replacement for logic.
That's it. We conclude the pudding episode.
I think we conclude the pudding episode. I think this was a good one.
That's definitely on the same level as the other ones.
Yes.
I don't know, like I said earlier, I don't know who watches this nonsense, but
I think it's mostly us.
Well, I hope we enjoy this later.
Yeah, I'd enjoy the others. Okay, that's it. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
I mean, me.